My name is Lauren. I'm 29 years old. There's a special kind of tired that settles in your bones when you feel like you're always in the way. It's that quiet apology in your voice when you ask for something, the little hesitation before you share an opinion, and it's the slow, crushing weight of realizing you've become a burden. For years, that's where I lived. I kept shrinking myself to fit into a relationship that just had no room for me. And then one day, without a fight or a single word, I just walked away. And that silence, it was the loudest thing I'd ever done. Before I got quiet, there was a lot of noise. Not the loud, door slamming, shouting kind of noise, at least not at first. It was quieter and way more damaging. It was the noise inside my own head, a constant looping track of self doubt. Am I asking for too much? Am I just being too sensitive? Is this all my fault? Feeling like a burden isn't something that happens overnight. It's a slow drip erosion of your self worth. You're gradually taught that your needs are inconvenient and your feelings are just overreactions. In my relationship, I was basically the designated feeler. I was the one who sensed the tension, who tried to start the hard conversations, who carried the emotional weight of our life together. I was the planner, the worrier, the person keeping track of all the invisible little threads that hold two lives together. And for all that, I was usually met with a sigh, a dismissive hand wave, or the classic, "You're thinking about it too much." I remember one night so clearly. I'd had a terrible day at work, the kind that leaves you feeling fragile and hollowed out. I came home just craving a little space, not for him to solve my problems, but just space to be sad without having to manage his discomfort with my sadness. I tried to talk about it, and he just kept scrolling on his phone, nodding every so often. Finally, he looked up, not with empathy, but with pure irritation. "Can we not do this tonight? I'm tired." I could literally feel myself shrink. It was like he'd reached out and physically shoved me away. My need for a little connection was an inconvenience. My feelings were a chore. After a while, you learn to expect this reaction. You start swallowing your words, pushing down your feelings, and telling yourself it's not a big deal. You start performing a version of yourself that's low maintenance, easygoing, and completely fake. You become a supporting character in your own life, always tuned in to what everyone else needs while ignoring your own. That's the real poison of a dynamic like this. It makes you feel ashamed for having needs in the first place. You start to believe you don't deserve to be cared for. That love is something you have to earn by being as little trouble as possible. The loneliness you feel inside a relationship is a special kind of hell. You can be sitting right next to someone and feel completely and utterly alone because you know the real you isn't welcome there. You're a ghost in your own home. Conversations turn into logistical reports about bills and schedules with no real connection. Affection starts to feel obligatory, like another item on a to do list, and you start to feel drained, not energized by the person who is supposed to be your safe place. My world got very, very small. It was defined by the constant effort of managing his comfort at the expense of my own. I was walking on eggshells, so terrified of triggering that familiar annoyed sigh that I barely moved at all. That's the real weight of being a burden. It's not just feeling heavy, it's being convinced you don't have the right to take up space at all. There's almost always a moment. It's not some dramatic movie scene explosion. It's usually a quiet, gut wrenching little click. It's the moment an illusion you've been holding on to just shatters and you suddenly see the truth with painful clarity. For me, that moment wasn't a big fight. It came from a simple look. We were at a friend's barbecue. It was a perfect summer day, the kind where everything feels light and easy. I was in the middle of telling a story about something I was really passionate about, something that made my eyes light up. I was feeling heard, seen by the group around me. And then I glanced over at my partner. He was looking at his friend and he rolled his eyes, a tiny, almost unnoticeable gesture. But to me, it was a stadium sized billboard flashing the words, "She's so much." In that 1 second, everything just froze. The laughter, the sunlight, the smell of the grill, it all faded away. All I could see was that look. It wasn't just dismissive, it was contempt. It was a look that said my enthusiasm was embarrassing, that my passion was just for show, that my very existence was something to be put up with. It was a public confirmation of every private fear I'd been wrestling with for years. Later that evening, the house was quiet. The weight of that eye roll sat between us, heavy and unspoken. I knew with a certainty that chilled me right to the bone that if I brought it up, the script was already written. I'd be accused of being dramatic, of misinterpreting things, of ruining a perfectly good night. I would be the problem. Again. So I didn't say a word. I just watched him get ready for bed, completely oblivious, or maybe just choosing to be ignorant, of the giant canyon that had just opened up between us. He was humming. He was happy. And I felt like I was drowning. Something inside me didn't just crack that night. It broke. Not with anger, but with clarity. It was the quiet little voice of self preservation, a part of me I'd silenced for so long, finally whispering, "You can leave. You don't need his permission to stop hurting." That was it. It wasn't a classic betrayal, but it was a betrayal of the most fundamental promise in a partnership, that you're a team, that you have each other's backs, that you are a source of pride for each other, not shame. I realized I had been waiting for him to change. I was hoping that one day he'd wake up and finally see my value. But that one look showed me the truth. He didn't see me as a partner to cherish. He saw me as a performance to critique. And you just can't build a life with your critic. That night, I stopped waiting for him to change. That was the night I finally chose myself. Deciding to leave is one thing. Actually, leaving is something else entirely. My first instinct, trained by years of needing his approval, was to explain myself. I wanted to write a long, detailed letter listing every single hurt, to have one final dramatic showdown where he would finally get it. But I knew deep down that was just another trap. That was me, yet again, looking for closure from the very person who was causing my pain. So I chose a different way, a path of quiet, deliberate detachment. This wasn't about ghosting or being cruel. It was an act of self preservation. The thought of another huge fight was exhausting. It would just be another performance where I'd be cast as the overly emotional one, and he'd play the calm, rational one being attacked for no reason. I just refused to audition for that role one more time. The most powerful thing I could say was nothing at all. I started to quietly pull away. I stopped trying to start conversations about us. I stopped asking for his help with things. I stopped volunteering for everything, no longer trying to prove my worth by doing things for him. I started making little plans for myself. I called up friends I'd let drift away because he thought they were annoying. I went for long walks by myself, rediscovering how nice it was to just be in my own company. Each little step was me rebuilding my own identity outside of him. This whole phase was a battle I fought inside my own head. Part of my own brain was screaming, panicking at the thought of being alone and feeling guilty for giving up. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not that bad. What if I'm the toxic one? That's the last little trick your mind plays on you in these situations. It convinces you that choosing yourself is selfish. To fight this, I started a private journal, but I didn't write about my feelings. I wrote down facts. I listed every time I felt dismissed, ignored, or devalued. I wrote down the eye roll, the sighs, the times my joy was met with his indifference. This wasn't a list of complaints for him, it was a file of evidence for myself. Whenever I felt my decision start to waver, I read it. That list was my anchor to reality. I also started stating my needs differently, not as a question, but as a fact. I'm going to read for a while. I'm going out with friends tonight. There was no room for him to say yes or no. These weren't requests needing his approval, they were just statements of my autonomy. And a funny thing happened. He barely noticed. My slow retreat was so quiet, so free of drama, that it didn't even show up on his radar. My absence didn't create a void because, in so many ways, I hadn't really been there for a long, long time. I was just a reflection of what he wanted me to be. The buildup wasn't about packing bags, it was about taking back my own mind. It was about learning to trust my own perception of reality over his version of it. It was realizing that true strength isn't about winning an argument, but refusing to even have it. That silence wasn't passive. It was the most active, powerful choice I had ever made. Have you ever found yourself shrinking to fit into a relationship? That feeling of being too much and not enough all at once is incredibly lonely. If any of this is hitting home for you, please know you are not alone. Share your experience in the comments, not just for me, but for everyone else reading who might feel like they're the only one. Sometimes just seeing your story written out is the first step toward taking your own story back. The day I actually left was completely unremarkable. There was no big fight, no tearful goodbye, no door slamming. All the emotional work was already done. The war inside me was over. All that was left was the simple physical act of leaving. He went to work just like any other Tuesday. I'd already packed my most important things over a few weeks, a couple of items at a time, hiding them in my car or dropping them at a friend's house. The big stuff, the furniture, the things we bought together, I had already let go of. It was just stuff. It was the price of my freedom, and honestly, it felt like a bargain. I walked through our apartment one last time. I looked at the couch where I'd sat feeling so lonely. I looked at the kitchen where I'd made dinners that were eaten in silence. It didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a stage set for a play I wasn't in anymore. I wrote a short, simple note. I didn't list out everything he'd done wrong. I didn't try to explain the past. It just said, I've gone. I wish you the best. There was no room for an argument, no opening for him to negotiate. It was a fact. Leaving that note was the real climax of my story. It was the quietest, most anticlimactic, and yet most powerful moment of my entire life. For years, I had been so loud with my needs, my feelings, my attempts to connect, and I was always met with silence. So I decided to speak his language. I answered his silence with my own. My absence would be the final word. Driving away, I didn't feel that dramatic movie scene sense of release I always thought I would. Instead, I just felt a deep, profound sense of calm. The constant noise in my head, the worrying, the anxiety, the endless second guessing, it just stopped. The silence in my car was peaceful, not empty. It was the sound of my own freedom. It was the sound of no longer having to apologize for existing. His reaction, when it finally came, was exactly what I knew it would be. A few texts, first confused, then angry. He called me a coward for not saying it to his face. He said I was throwing away everything we had built, but there was no real question of why, no self reflection at all. It was all blame, all focused on how. I left, not why I left. He was just mad that I denied him a final scene, the one where he got to play the victim of my dramatic exit. I read the texts, and for the first time, they had zero power over me. They were just words from someone I didn't know anymore. I deleted them without a single reply. The conversation was over. It had been over for a very long time. I just finally had the courage to hang up the phone. Walking away quietly wasn't weakness. It was me taking back every last bit of my power. I didn't need him to understand. I understood, and that was all that mattered. Those first few weeks after I left were strange. The silence I wanted so badly was now all around me, and sometimes it was deafening. I had spent so long living with the background static of anxiety that its absence was jarring. I had to relearn the rhythm of my own life. I had to remember who I was when I wasn't performing for somebody else. This was my emotional detox. I had to consciously stop myself from filling the silence. I made one rule: no contact. I blocked his number, not out of anger, but to protect my new peace. Every time my mind would drift back to him, I would gently guide it back to myself. What do I need right now? Do I need a walk? Do I need to call a friend? Do I just need to sit here and breathe for a minute? It was a constant practice of putting my own well being first. Healing isn't a straight line. There were days I felt euphoric and free. And then there were days the grief would hit me like a ton of bricks. And it's important to know you can grieve a relationship even when it was toxic. You grieve the good times, the potential you thought it had, the person you thought they were, and the years you feel like you lost. Letting myself feel that sadness without judging myself for it was a huge step. I wrote him one last letter, one I never sent, and poured out all the anger, the hurt, and the sadness. It was like getting poison out of my system. The most important part of my recovery was rebuilding my self worth from the ground up. Low self esteem was the soil that let that toxic relationship grow. So I started doing things that made me feel capable and proud. I took a solo hiking trip. I started a new hobby. I threw myself into my work with a new sense of purpose. These weren't huge things, just small daily acts of keeping promises to myself. Each one was another brick in the foundation of my new life. I also went to therapy. Talking to a professional helped me see the patterns that made me vulnerable to a relationship like that in the first place. I learned about things like trauma bonding and emotional labor. It gave me words for what I had gone through, which took away the layer of self blame I'd been carrying. It wasn't that there was something wrong with me, it was that I had learned unhealthy ways to cope in an unhealthy environment. One of the biggest lessons was learning that it was never my job to fix him. I had always seen his behavior as a problem for me to solve, a person for me to rescue. But the truth is, you can't love someone into treating you with respect. Their healing is their own journey. Trying to manage it for them is just a fast track to losing yourself. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. The peace I feel isn't just a mood, it's the foundation of my life. I can breathe. I can laugh loudly without wondering if it's too much. I can have a bad day and know that it's okay to not be okay. Walking away quietly wasn't just about leaving a relationship, it was about coming home to myself. Walking away from someone you once loved, especially when you do it without a big fight, is one of the hardest and bravest things you will ever do. It is an act of radical self respect. It's a declaration that your peace is more important than their comfort. For anyone out there who feels like a burden, please hear me. You are not too much. You are not responsible for carrying someone else's emotional weight. A healthy relationship should feel like a safe harbor, not a place where you constantly have to defend your right to exist. The silence that comes after you leave can be scary, but inside that silence, you'll start to hear a voice you might have forgotten, your own. Listen to it, trust it, nurture it. Rebuilding your life is a journey, but it starts with that first quiet step away from what's breaking you. You are worthy of a life where you don't have to shrink yourself, where you can take up all the space you need, and where your presence is celebrated, not just tolerated. Thank you for being here and you for sharing this space with me. If this story meant something to you, please consider subscribing for more conversations about healing and finding your way back to yourself. And be kind to yourself today. You really, truly deserve it.